Ridge and Little Creek. I don't know, maybe to Marion, but anyway, they decided they would try to visit them. Still planning on, I think, trying to be back by Monday. And part of them have already started back this way.
Yeah.
Tom and Sherry and Vicky and I don't know, somebody else. But
Benny
anyway,
and Sherry, maybe?
DuPont.
Benny and Sherry?
Yeah, Benny and Sherry. So they plan on, but Benny and Sherry's already headed back this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they plan on trying to be back by Monday, she said.
Yeah. Cheryl and John went up with them,
Yeah.
and Cheryl was really encouraged by all that. After, when she got home, said something like she couldn't wait to do some more of that kind of, going out and visiting. Well, I guess I told her that we went visiting while everybody was gone, and so she wanted to hear more, but I haven't called her back yet. But I was glad for that. I was glad you got to go with us Sunday.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
glad you went.
I was glad to get to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I never had met her.
Yeah, I had never had either. I'd never met her before.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I loved her.
Yeah.
And the Lord was mindful of her.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was so glad that we got to go, that you had a headway to go. You know, that's where I guess we get to where we kind of depend on each other.
Yeah.
And depend on their understanding, others' understanding. And sometimes maybe I don't have the headway to go, and you do. And if you say, I feel like going so and so, and I feel like you need to go too, I'll move on your understanding.
Yeah.
And the Lord will help us, I think, to be a help to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they had said that she was having a hard time, and I didn't know. I knew she had cancer, and I didn't have any idea how bad she was. And but I just thought it's a soul. I don't know her, never seen her before, but I thought it's a soul. And if I was in bad shape, I'd hope somebody would bring the Lord and come and see me.
Yes.
Yep.
I would too.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's great that the Lord will lay us on other people's hearts.
Yeah.
I thought after Cecil had that first wreck, it affected all of his trauma was right in his face and head. He ran into the back of that flatbed truck, and that metal part was what came through the windshield and got his head. And after that, he kind of lost his understanding, and he depended on me a lot after that. And I thought, Bill, he was talking about obeying the Lord in the services, and he said, and Mom, he said there was one man that I kind of dreaded. He said, because I knew if I made a mistake that he'd know it. And he said, I kind of dreaded him. And I said, who was it, Bill? He said, my dad. He said, I knew if I made a mistake, he'd know it. And I said, well, that'd be good. I said, it'd be good, and he can help you over that. And we can help each other on the way.
Yeah.
Well, I hardly know where to start.
Yeah.
Maybe back when I first found the Lord. I was raised in a Christian home. My dad was a holiness preacher, and my mom was a godly holiness mother. And we went to church, and the first church that I remember, my grandfather gave the land to build it, and my uncle gave the timber. And back then, I don't think holiness had ever come into our community. And so the Free Will Baptists, they took it over. And it was a big old church, just kind of like the church at Coffee Ridge. And it set back up against a bank. And the first time I ever knew to pray, my mom went down to clean the church. And I got in behind that church and that bank. And I got on my knees and I began to pray. And the Lord, He blessed me. I didn't say anything to my mom. She would have prayed with me and been glad to. But I was just a child, and I just knew I needed to get hold of the Lord. Well, and as time went on, my mom went down on Sunday morning to clean the church or build a fire or something. There was a padlock on the door, and there was a sign saying, "This church is closed." It was signed by the Doe River Association of Free Will Baptists. Well, they went on and they tore it down. So we didn't have anywhere to go to church for a while. Only we met in people's homes, different homes, you know. And my dad had an old mill house, big old thing. It sat kind of over the creek. And for a while, we met in that old mill house for services. And when it started getting cold weather, my dad had a little rental house, and he went in, tore the petitions out, and opened it up. We had service there for a while, and then they started building the little church on Simley Creek. Most of the people would just say the little block. And my mom and this other precious lady, they went from door to door and asked if anybody had a donation. And after I grew up, I saw that where the people had given. And sometimes it would be 25 cents,
Yeah.
50 cents, or $1. But they got what they could. Well, my dad and my two brothers, they went just like they were punching a clock for work. And they started building on that little church. And the Lord really blessed. And it was sitting kind of in the forks of the road. And this man that owned it, he said, I'm sorry. Daddy asked him about buying it to build a church. And he said, well, he said, it's not for sale. He said, there have been a lot of people wanting to buy this. Maybe it'd be a good place to have a store. And but he said, it's not for sale. He talked on. But he said, well, I'm going to give you that land to build your church. my brother married his daughter after that. But he said, I'm going to give you that land. And that man, I had never seen him in church. He lived just a few yards from the church. The only time I ever saw him in the church was they were working on it, and it started to rain, and he came inside the church. And Daddy put up a sign inside that said, True Holiness Church of God. And the man, he didn't claim to live right or anything, and he saw the sign. He said, well, that's exactly what I'd like for it to say. And so we worshiped there for years, and now I think it's probably Free Will Baptist that's in there, but it was free. We had services, and our crowds, sometimes it would be so full that the brethren, they'd come up around the pulpit and stand with Dad while he preached. And he just had a little space. He was a pretty active preacher. And the windows, they'd open the windows and folks would be standing outside listening. And the Lord did many, many wonderful miracles there in that little church. And as time went on, we had services and people were getting healed. One day, this man, he was pretty well known in the kitchen, in the community. And he was there in the service, and the Lord began to work. And this little boy, he might have been a little older than Brandon and Lindsay's little Gavin. And he'd been playing around, and I'd get him on my knees and I'd pet him. And something happened to him, and he passed away. I mean, he was dead. And I saw this. And this is not something that you hear about. I was there, and I saw this. And this little boy, he died. Well, Daddy had the people together around and pray, and nothing happened. His little fingernails were blue. His eyes had just rolled back in his head. And Daddy asked for prayer, and nothing happened. Well, Daddy said, we need to pray again. And he said, if there's anybody in here that don't believe that the Lord can raise this little boy, he said, I'd like for you to step out the door so the spirit won't be hindered. Well, this guy sat back towards the back. He called us a bunch of fools. He said, why don't they call the funeral home and let them come get that baby? Said he's as dead as he'll ever be. Well, my dad anointed him, and we all prayed again. That little boy's fingernails started turning like pink again, and his eyes open. He just looked around. And that little boy is still alive today. He owns a business in Elizabethton, Tennessee. He's still there. And that's one of the things that the Lord worked in that service. And my dad had a big tent, and we went places, and he'd set up different places to have tent revivals. And this one place where we went was just out of Irwin, Tennessee. And the folks were coming out. We were really having a crowd and having real good services. And after Daddy had preached, I guess, this lady came up to the front, and she wanted to be prayed for. And she had a big garter on her neck here, and we prayed. We gathered around and prayed, and Daddy anointed her. As his hand went down over her neck, and down over that garter went down. As long as she lived, she wasn't bothered with that.
Yeah.
And this, there was another lady that came. She was, I think she was the first cousin of Cecil's dad. And she had broken her arm, and it was in a cast. And she came up to be prayed for. And this was the kind that they had to saw off, that hard cast. And she came up to be prayed for. And we gathered around and prayed with her. And Daddy anointed her. And she went down through that tent, raising her arms. That cast went flying through the air. She was healed. She never had that cast put on again. And her name was Minnie Rogers. And we knew her for a lot of years, well, until she passed away. And things that the Lord just worked out, you know, and things, I guess, maybe sounds unreasonable to people.
Yeah.
And if we've got faith, and I know sometimes if you're sick, sometimes I can get a burden to pray for you, and I can have the faith, Lord, I know you're going to do this. But sometimes when it comes to our own, it's kind of hard to have the faith, you know. And so as the church went on, and the Lord blessed, and he healed, and when Daddy had the tent, the Lord blessed in that. And some people, you know how people are to kind of thinking on things. And Will Wright said, he sticks his finger in the socket up there and said he shocks those people and they fall. But I mean, that was another one of those made up things.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of experiences in the Lord, and a lot of the folks that I knew the Lord blessed so many times. And I was just 12 years old when the Lord dealt with me, and I didn't have any idea. I mean, it just hadn't entered my mind that I would go to that altar. They were having a revival, and my dad wasn't there. He was going somewhere else to preach at night. And we had service, and they made an altar call, and I never thought anything about moving on that altar call. But when they were singing and having the altar call, all at once, I just found myself walking up that aisle. to go give him a hand for prayer. And after I gave him a hand for prayer, and maybe a few people hugged my neck, I turned around and I went back towards my seat. And I got about the second or third pew back. And this little older lady, she just stepped out in front of me as I was going back. And she took me in her arms and she said, Betty, she said, don't you want to pray? The tears just rolled down my face. And I just nodded my head, yes, I did. And I bowed right there. We didn't go on up to the altar, but I bowed right there. And the Lord came into my heart, and he gave me salvation. And like I've spoken in the church services, it's been a wonder to me how the Lord, with all the millions and billions of people over this world, and somehow or other, he could look down at a little country girl and see me and say, I want you. And I've tried to serve the Lord for many, many years, and I don't say I've never made a mistake. I have. And I've had to go back and repent. And I know we just got to be honest. And anyway, the Lord has helped me. And I could not, it seemed like it was more than I could just wrap my little mind around, that the Lord would find me and love me enough that he said, I'll be your father.
Yeah.
You can be my daughter.
Yeah.
And thus far, I've never found anything that I thought I wanted to trade it for.
Yes.
Never. And like I said, I made mistakes sometimes, but I'm still pressing on, trying to make it home. 89 years ago, I was born into this world. 77 years of those, I've been trying to serve the Lord. And it's always been such a joy and so much love and care. And I tell the Lord, Lord, you not only provide the necessities for me, you provide the extras, things that we could do without and our older people used to do without, that we've got, that God has provided for us. Yeah. And he's led me this far. He never let me down. And I can't say that the Lord has ever failed me. If there had been any failing, it would have been on my part. But I thank the Lord that he's such a kind, loving, patient God, that he can help me, lift me up when I'm down. And the Lord knows our needs. And now my family, my boys, they need help. The Lord has laid a calling on their lives, and they're not working like they should. They need the help of the Lord. But one time when Steve and Doug, they were teenagers, and they were in high school, and I thought it seemed like they were getting a little careless, especially Steve. Some of his friends, one of his friends had a car, and Steve sometimes after school he would leave with him, and I got so troubled, and I remember the day, and I had done laundry, and I was hanging my clothes out on the line, and the heaviest burden just hit my heart, and I said, I said, Lord, I said, whatever this is, I said, I pray that you will keep a godly fear in my children's hearts. And I said, whatever it takes. Well, you know, sometimes we don't realize what we're asking for when we say whatever it takes. But that's what it will take. And so that evening, it was kind of cool, and we had an old coal furnace in the basement. And so the boys went down. Cecil was in the bathtub, and the boys went down, and they were gonna stoke the furnace and put in some coal, and they didn't realize that there was still live coals in there. And they picked up a container of gas, and they threw that in that furnace. And when they did, the people up on the hill above us said they saw the fire and they thought my house was on fire. And one of the others came running in and said, Mom, said the basement's on fire. And I had some big old drapes, heavy drapes that I just had from the cleaners, and they were laying there. And I just ran and got those drapes, and I went down and I went into that room where the fire was burning. And my boys, they got out, and I went down in there, and I wrapped that drape around that can of gas, and I carried it out. Well, I'd said that day, Lord, whatever it takes. And, well, they were burned. Steve's face, and maybe his neck, and Doug's back where they'd turned, tried to run. Doug's back and arms were burned. They were burned pretty bad. And so I told Cecil, he'd come on in, and I said, Cecil, run a tub of cold water and put them in it. And that's always what I always did when I had a burn. And he did, and I was standing there, and I saw those boys, my boys. They were sitting in that tub and trying to pull that cold water up over them to cool the burns. And I started to run out. I said, Lord, I can't stand this. I said, that's my babies. And it's just like you would have been there and said, wait a minute. He said, you asked me today, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And all I could do, I just turned around and said, amen. And so we took them on out to the ER. And that was, Cecil had had a heart attack not long before that. And he wasn't able to do very much. So they had Doug on one cart and Steve on the other. And they brought me a big dishpan full of ice water. And I just go from one to the other and putting that ice water on them. And we, after that, we brought them home. And there wasn't even a scar. And that one of the girls from high school, one of them, when they told her that Steve's face was burnt and she was so afraid it was going to be all scarred, she said, oh, and he was so good looking, I believe is the way she said. And everybody expected scars. Never one, never a scar on Steve's face or his arms or Doug's back and neck. They neither one ever had a scar from that. But that taught me a thing. If you don't mean it, don't say it. Don't tell the Lord if you don't mean it. And I thought I meant that, with everything that was in me. And of course, as time went on, and the boys they had been in church, and it's along about the same time, and Steve was on my mind again, and I could take you back to the church at Little Creek, the very spot where I sat. I sat up there as you go in on the right where the singers sat. And I was singing a song, and the Lord began to deal with me again. And I prayed to the Lord again, whatever it takes. The Lord began to deal with me, and it's like He said, like I met this. I said, Lord, I'll do anything for my children. Keep my children out of hell. I said, whatever you say. First, the Lord had me to meet. I said, Lord, I'd go through storms. I'd go through floods or whatever. And I met that. The Lord helped me to meet that. And I said, Lord, I'd go overseas. I'd go anywhere that you say, if you make the way, if you just take care of my boys. And again, the voice of the Lord said, will you take his place in hell? Oh my, you don't know the feeling that was there. And I thought on it, and I said, Lord, you know I don't want to go to hell. And when I said that, I said, but I don't want my little boy to go to hell either. He said, would you take his place? I never heard of anybody meeting a consecration like that. And would you take his place in hell? And after a while, I met him. And I said, yes, Lord. I said, if that's the only way, I said, yeah, I'll take his place. Right then, I knew that I had swapped my home in heaven for a place in hell so that my little boy wouldn't have to go. And we were having services. I was singing. I think the song that I was singing was, I've held a lot of things in my own two hands, and I've lost them all, I'll confess. But everything that I've ever put in the hands of the Lord, these things I still possess. Marietta was playing the piano. Steve was sitting way back, pretty close to the back. Marietta got up off of the piano stool. She started down, and when she did, Steve knew where she was coming. He started coming out between the seats, and they met in the aisle there, and the Lord gave him salvation. And I thought, now, he's not working at that. He's not doing what the Lord's called him to do. And it troubles me so. And I thought, Lord, you could help me to meet that again. If it was necessary, I don't want to go to hell. But Lord, if that's what it takes, I know you can help me to be willing to meet that again. But then the Lord said, you don't have to. As far as I knew, I had already swapped my home for a place in hell. The Lord said, you don't have to. He's such a sweet boy. He said, I took his place a long time ago on an old rugged cross. He said, but he'll have to come to me. And that was a big relief, I tell you, when I could feel like, no, I don't have to go to hell. The Lord will take care of things. And my children will have to make their own decisions. I couldn't take them 1 inch into heaven if I wanted to. But we've had a lot of good years. And we went a lot of different places. The van, and for maybe a couple of years there, we had appointments for Saturday nights, months ahead of time, different places. People would come and they would be maybe from another church, and they would ask us to come to their church. And we went, had a lot of services up around the Asheville and Marshall and Mars Hill and up in that area. And the Lord, He blessed us, and we had a lot of good times. The boys with their guitars, and Bill had the bass, and Marietta the piano, and we just went so many different places, and the Lord blessed. And I'd like to live that over again.
Yeah.
If I could go back and live what I lived, I'd like to live it again with the Lord's help, with having my children all in church and working for the Lord. And we had this, I've got a video on my computer at home. We were in this service in Johnson City, and this guy, he made the video for Bill, I think, and I've got it on my computer, where my mom and my 2 brothers and their wives and Cecil and me and Doug and Jean and Steve and Jane and Tom and Marietta and Bill were all on the floor shouting. I've lived that through that video many times. It's been a blessing. And Steve, I think he might have been coming in a little later. And I said the words. I said, here he comes, striding up the aisle. And wasn't long till he was on the floor too. And the Lord just gave us victory that night. And that's meant so much to me.
Yeah.
It's just, I couldn't tell what I've got out of that.